The Cleveland Cavaliers look fantastic. Let's get into this.
Dosage. Oh yeah, I work with the medics. I'm about to get you injected. I got a couple connections so I can get you prosthetics.
Quickly before we get the video started, if you guys enjoy this video and want to see more NBA content just like this one, hit that subscribe button and that post notification bell. Anyways, back to the video. The Cleveland Cavaliers have been very impressive this season. After a relatively good start, and a lot of people thinking that the Cavs were just going to be one of those teams that have a good start and then just fall off, the Cavs recently, at the very least, took their games to the next level. And currently, at the time of recording the video, the Cleveland Cavaliers are actually the number 3 seed in the Eastern Conference with a 19-12 record. And also, not to mention, they're on a 6-game winning streak. They're just on absolute fire. And it appears early on in the season that the Cavs did a fantastic job at not only drafting over the past few years, but also bringing in some younger guys and some older guys as well to bring into this organization and just match everything together. When you talk about some of the players they drafted, of course, Evan Mobley, in my opinion, is going to be a very good player going forward and somebody I'm very excited about. And of course, you have a guy in Darius Garland who they drafted somewhat recently. I'm also excited about his future. Colin Sexton's a pretty good scorer in this league and a pretty nice young player. Jared Allen was someone that they traded for a season back. I think that was a fantastic trade for them. They basically gave up minimal assets, and in return they got a guy in Jared Allen who, in my opinion, is one of the best rebounders we have in the NBA, offense and defensive. And of course, he's a fantastic defender, is always a pick and lob threat, and also has somewhat of a hook shot within his game and some post moves as well. Overall, I think that was a fantastic trade. Another player that they picked up who, in my opinion, has very good value going forward is Markin. What he could do on the offensive end in terms of spacing the floor at that forward position for those catch and shoot 3-point shots is very special. But even besides that, of course, he has the ability to create for himself, put the ball on the floor, drive all the way to the basket, do a little bit of a post turnaround fadeaway. Clearly has the ability to create for himself as well. I think he's certainly going to be a very good player for them going forward, and they're going to be lucky that they got him. You talk about a guy in Isaac Okoro who they just drafted recently. He hasn't been tremendous thus far, but he has been showing some nice things in my opinion. Of course, he's great on the defensive end, has the ability to catch and shoot from that 3-point range, also has the ability to put the ball on the floor, drive all the way to the basket. I would say he's more of a raw player compared to some of the other guys that I mentioned, but certainly has some potential going forward as a great defender, potentially maybe a 3-and-D type guy with also the ability to put the ball on the floor. So we'll see what happens with him going forward. You talk about a guy in Ricky Rubio who they just brought in. Of course, we all know what Ricky Rubio is at this point, but I think he's a perfect player to pick up for a young Cavaliers team like this team is, and especially teach guys like Colin Sexton and Darius Garland how to truly run an NBA offense, because of course Rubio has been doing it for so long and for so many different teams. And after years and years of this Cavaliers organization just struggling overall in terms of bad trades, bad draft picks, bad players in free agency, it finally appears that this current front office in Cleveland now is finally starting to put things together. They've made some great draft picks, as I mentioned, some great trades, as I mentioned, and also some great free agency pickups. And it is very early on in most of these players' careers, but early on in their careers, I will say that they have shown some promise, and if they can keep this up and some of the players on the Cavs can live up to those expectations that I personally have for them, I think this Cavs team could be a very dangerous team going forward in the near future. But let's talk about this season. What can we expect from the Cavs this year? Are they potentially a playoff team? If they are a playoff team, are they a team that's just going to be a first round exit? Could they go farther in the playoffs? Or are they just having a hot start now and they're going to completely fall off a cliff going forward? But first of all, I just want to mention, I think a lot of people, including myself, really need to redefine what our expectations are for the Cavaliers. So going into the season, my personal expectations for the Cavs, and a lot of other people's as well, was the Cavs were certainly a team who were starting to build something, had some nice young players on their team, but overall, at least in my opinion, I thought the Cavs would be a 10th, maybe 11th or a 12th seed in the Eastern Conference. Definitely still a rebuilding team that was going in the right direction, but of course still a rebuilding team and would be nowhere near the NBA playoffs. But of course, early on in this season, at least so far, I'm completely wrong, as well as a lot of other people who had a similar opinion to mine. And as I mentioned, the Cavs are the 3rd seed in the Eastern Conference. Now first, do I think the Cavs will end this season as a 3rd seed in the Eastern Conference? I'm gonna have to say no. I don't think they're that good. I think they're off to a fantastic start, of course, especially on the 6-game stretch that they're on. The fantastic play overall. Just beat the defending champs, the Milwaukee Bucks. Very, very impressive win. But I don't necessarily think a 3rd seed in the Eastern Conference is necessarily sustainable sustainable going forward for the rest of the year. I think a really good comparison for the Cavs this year is the New York Knicks of last year. So the Knicks last year going into the season, basically nobody expected them to be anything similar to the Cavs this year, but of course, as we saw, the Knicks did start off a little slower than the Cavs did. The Cavs are on absolute fire, but towards the latter half of the season, the Knicks ended up as a 4th seed in the Eastern Conference and made the playoffs. Of course, didn't necessarily do anything in the playoffs, but overall, it was a pretty successful season. And for the Cavs, I have very similar expectations. I don't think the Cavs are going to be the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference, maybe the 5th if they're lucky, but honestly, I would probably have to say anywhere from 6 to 10. I think this team certainly will be a play-in team, but also at the same time, I could easily see them be a play-off team. But the reason why I give such a large range is the NBA, but the reason why I give such a large range for the Cavs is, of course, it's a wild card. We don't necessarily know what they can do going forward and if it's sustainable, but when you look at the Eastern Conference specifically this season, it's much better this year than it was last year, and really just the entire NBA as a whole. The NBA is just so much more talented and so much more competitive this year compared to years prior. So I think it's going to be much more difficult for a team like the Cavs to become the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference than it was for the Knicks to become the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference last year. But overall, even if the Cavs are maybe the 8th, 7th seed, or maybe even the 9th seed, I overall think it will be a successful season for them, and once they make it to the playoffs, if they maybe win a game, win 2 games, overall I don't think it really matters. I think it will be considered a success based on the expectations going into the year. But if you're a Cavaliers fan, there's a ton to be excited about. Of course, besides the individual players, there's a decent chance that the Cavs are going to make the playoffs this year, so maybe you can do something once you get to the playoffs and making the playoffs in general for the first time in some time for the Cavs. So that's certainly exciting for the Cavs fans. But also going long term, I think a lot of these guys, specifically a guy in Evan Mobley, I think he's going to be really good going forward, as I mentioned before. Another guy specifically is Darius Garland. I think although he had a pretty rough rookie season, I think he's definitely shown the ability to play in the NBA, and overall the skill set and game that he actually has, I think is perfect for the new age NBA, and he's a player specifically that I am certainly a big fan of. You talk about a guy in Colin Sexton, I think he's certainly a very talented young guy, but I don't necessarily know if him and Darius are necessarily going to work out going forward, and Colin has certainly been in some trade rumors already, so maybe you look to ship him off and truly have Darius as your main point guard on your team going forward, and maybe add a few pieces by trading Colin. Could be wrong, maybe Colin Sexton would be a fantastic player going forward, but I would just probably personally rather go with Darius if you had to pick one. But overall, we'll see what happens going forward with the Cavs this year, and we'll also see what happens with them going forward. But I think for both of those answers, we're certainly going to see something exciting. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think the Cavs are going to be a really good team this year and going forward? And if so, what are your personal expectations for this Cavs team? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, please leave a like and subscribe and hit that post notification bell. It really helps me out a lot. Until the next time, peace out, guys.
Dosage. Oh yeah, I work with the medics. I'm about to get you injected. I got a couple connections so I can get you prosthetics. Hope you can't go where I'm headed.